Okay, no, it's working now. That was obviously a temporary thing.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, we're now live.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you, Diane. So welcome everybody to CYP Scrutiny, our August meeting 2022. Welcome to board members and anybody else who's chosen to join us on this wonderful evening and not being sat in the garden. Let's kick off then. Substitutes, do we have any in particular for this evening?
I've not been informed of any substitutes tonight, Chair, or apologies.
Thank you very much. And we were hoping for somebody from the Youth Council. Do we know who's joined us, who is joining us from the Youth Council?
Not as yet, Chair, but John's subbing for Claire tonight. So I've seen that John's on the call, so I'm hoping they'll join us shortly.
Good, excellent. So welcome to them when they can join us. Can I move on to item 2, members' interest, to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they might have in relation to the items on the agenda, either now or when it becomes appropriate. Do we have anything at this? No, good, thank you. Admission of the public, it's not recommended the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items on this particular agenda. So welcome to those who've chosen to join us. Let's look at the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of July 2022. We need to agree and or correct anything. Are there any corrections from members who were attending that meeting? Can't see anybody. So can we have a proposal? We accept those minutes?
I'm happy to propose that.
Thank you very much. And a seconder. Excellent. Thank you, David. And all in favour? Yes. Good. We'll get those minutes signed as and when possible. Move on to the first substantive item on the agenda. SEND, Special Education Needs and Disability Provision, the review. There was a publication nationally on needs and disabilities back in March on existing school provision and development of new provision for SEND children in Calderdale. Members requested a report, and this is that report. I think, Julie, you and a group of you are going to lead this one. Sue Williams will be involved in this. So could I introduce Sue Williams, our new Assistant Director in the department, and perhaps Sue, you could just introduce yourself to members on the board, could you?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sue Williams. I'm the new Assistant Director for Education and Inclusion, and it's lovely to be here this evening.
Thank you very much, Sue. We look forward to working with you. Julie, do you want to kick off, or are your colleagues doing so? How do you want to run this particular meeting for now, this particular item?
Thanks very much, Councillor Evans. Yes, we're joined for this item this evening by Sue, but also David Graham, who's our Interim Service Manager for Special Educational Needs. And David has attended Scrutiny on a couple of previous occasions to bring you updates on SEND reports. I'm going to hand over to David and Sue. What they're going to do, Councillor Evans, because I know this is the way that you would prefer it, is to cover a couple of the top headlines for you, but really leave plenty of time for discussion and questions from Scrutiny tonight, if that's okay.
Excellent, thank you, that's perfect.
So if I just start then, the SEND review, the Right Support, Right Place, Right Time, was actually published in March of this year. And that's a green paper from the government, and it was the basis of a consultation that closed in July. So really it's about the reforms to the SEND system in 2014, and the green paper highlights some of the challenges that we're facing nationally that remain within that SEND system. So some of the things like the poor outcomes for children, and the navigating the system for the children and their parents, and really how that system isn't delivering value for money. There was a SEND review that was published, and again, those consistently poor outcomes, that negative experience, and that unsustainability of that financial pressure right across the system, as well as inconsistencies across the country, were a real issue. So what the government wishes to do is introduce a national system so that there are national standards for SEND across the country, really consistent processes and consistent funding. So this was really a consultation about how that might work across the country, the consultation actually closed in July. So this really is to just update everyone about what is happening, but also just give you some information about Calderdale. So in Calderdale, we do have a higher proportion of our children and young people with educational health and care plans in our mainstream schools. Our SEND assessments are actually completed well in time, and we've got really high proportions, in the 90% in those statutory timescales, compared to nationally in that sort of mid-50 range. So a really good picture there. We have in the recent years seen an increase, as there has been nationally, in the number of children with educational health and care plans, and that looks like it is going to continue to rise. We've also in recent years seen an increase in demand for special school places, and that is an area of focus for us to look at going forward, that inclusion agenda, both within our mainstream schools, looking at units, but also with a new special school, and also with looking at how we can sort of work with the sector to develop this work. So that's the sort of summary of the paper. And over to you, Councillor Evans, for any questions from the committee.
Thank you for that intro. My first cynical, quasi-political comment is there really new money in here, or is it something which has just been renamed? Are we actually going to get a bit more money to do the things we need to do?
I think it's really difficult at this stage. I mean, there is talk about money in there, but we're actually not sure what actually will be the outcome of the consultation at this stage. So we actually do have some funding for family hubs, which is being made available to us, but actually we're not sure quite yet how any of this is going to work. So this was a consultation. It's very laudable to have a national system, to have consistency across the country and to have fair funding across the country. I think what's important to say here, in different areas, those assessments take place quite differently, and therefore the amount of funding in plans can be quite different in different areas of the country. So to have a national system, I think, is actually something that's very laudable. How that will actually work and what will actually work is something that we're not really clear on the detail until the government has actually published the outcome of the consultation.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, it's always one of the issues, isn't it? It's always having all these nice ideas, but we need funding to enable us to do it. I'm seeing a number of hands going up. The first one I noticed was Councillor Riveron. Helen, you wanted to ask a question, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One or two questions on different things. One of the ones that hasn't been highlighted in your presentation, and I'm just trying to find the right page, is around the exclusion figures. The exclusion figures have increased, and there seems to be very significant and worrying percentage of those who have EHCP. So I would like to ask a little bit more about that. Couple of other questions, and I know these are quite a number of reasons, is that we're told about a number of reasons for the increased demand for SEND places. Personally, I think there's a reason that's been missed out, and that is a lot of the target-driven pressure within mainstream schools. I admit there's probably might not be a lot we can do about it, but it is something I intend to keep on saying because I think it needs to be said. But the other would be among one of the reasons we're often given, and I'm still struggling to find the right page, is that more children, young people with profound and multiple difficulties are surviving to school age. That may well be true, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be reflected in the numbers, whereas I think that category is only about 40, whereas those like ASD are an awful lot larger. I think the final point I would make, and I am aware of, because of my own postbag, a lot of demand for a new SEND school, I still would like to see looked at resource provision in mainstream as an alternative in terms of being closer to the norm. And I think people should be consulted on different alternatives rather than just one option being given. And I think the other thing I would say, among a lot of people who've contacted me about a new SEND school, is it means very different things to very different people. Quite understandably, people who are dissatisfied either with SEND or mainstream provision at the moment think this new school will be the answer to what they need for their children. It isn't going to be for everybody. I hope it will be for some, but that is another reason why I think we should look at resource provision rather than just a SEND school, because I think we might be sort of giving expectations to a lot of SEND parents who obviously desperately want the best for their child, and a lot of whom, are in very difficult, challenging circumstances, that it might offer them something that actually it can't. Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly need to manage expectations, don't we? Sue, do you want to come back on those?
Yes, if I can just come back, I think that's a really good point from Councillor regarding exclusions. They are rising in Calderdale, and we have some schools, particularly in the secondary sector, where exclusions and suspensions, which is that temporary removal from school, is rising, and we've got some very high figures there. So that is an area of focus for me. I'm in my second week today, but that is an area of focus that I'll be looking at with schools over the coming year, because our exclusions are very high and they are very concerning. So I totally understand that being raised today, and that is something as part of the inclusion work that has been going on. And something needs to be addressed further, and we need to accelerate the progress of that work, I believe, over the next year. So I think that is very true. That then puts pressure on our alternative provision, which actually is included within the special educational needs paper, and it does put pressure on the number of places that we have as a council that we commission in alternative provision. So that is something that is also a pressure for us moving forward. I think what you said about targets in schools and that target-driven pressure, I think there is, potentially a challenge there. We understand from the schools white paper, which I'll be bringing to you in September, that there is a real ambition from the government for improving outcomes in schools. And obviously we all want to see better outcomes in schools, but there could be an unintended consequence that schools maybe are less inclusive because there is more challenge there. So that is something that we want to sort of work with schools to address moving forward, to ensure that the children can remain in school and we don't see such high numbers. I note your point about the number of ASD increasing. That is a national issue, and it is something that we are aware of in Calderdale and something that we're looking to address. I totally understand the point about also looking at resource provision in schools, and that is something that we are looking at. We have some resource provision already across the authority, and that is something that we will be looking to look to see if we can work with the schools to increase the number of resource provisions, and see if some schools would like to take on resource provisions in their settings moving forward. So I think that's the points there, Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much. I do have an extensive list so far. I've got councillors Isett, Monteith, Durrant and Atkinson in that order. I've noted them. So perhaps Felicity, Councillor Isett, you would like to take the next question?
Hi, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. So it might be easier if I sort of do them a bit at a time because they're quite data driven. So I'm looking at the table on page 17 and the placements of students with EHCPs. So my first question would be looking at the number of students with an EHCP that are electively home educated. And that I was just wondering if we knew sort of the reasons behind these and why they were electively home educated. I know that I've spoken to people in the past who've electively home educated their child because their needs weren't being met in schools, and had particular students who maybe had ASD, and therefore it was easier to electively home educate them than to keep them in school. And then what sort of support we provide them as a local authority, because having a student or a child with a need and having them at home 24/7, it talks in the green paper about the support that we provide parents in terms of respite So I just wondered if we knew how much we knew about these students and how we were supporting those families. That's sort of my first question.
Thank you. That's an interesting one. It was on my list. There's also this thing in relation to that of home education networks. I think there are some in Leeds and around there, whether there are any around the Calderdale area, which may be assisting in that. If I just add that one in onto Felicity's question. But Sue, do you want to respond to that?
I think I might pass to my colleague, David, if you're there, David, if you could respond. I'm not sure you'll have the detail on that, but if we can just respond overarchingly on the principle of how we work in Calder, that'll be useful, David.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I don't have elective home education, doesn't sit within my service. Although what I can say is that if you look at that data, the fact that the numbers have decreased post-pandemic is quite interesting. In a number of authorities, we've seen an increase in elective home education. And I think you're right, there's two reasons in the main why people elective home education, and that's either a faith or a cultural reason that they have a particular program they want their children to access, or it's a dissatisfaction and a negative experience within the school system. So in terms of elective home education numbers, and what the Green Paper is alluding to, and which you've actually focused on, is that there is no duty on local authorities to make provision for elective home education children, even those with an educational health and care plan. And so, again, the support that they get and the networks they get across different authorities are very inconsistent. So we're certainly anticipating that they may well bring in further duties for us in terms of supporting those people. But, you know, at the moment, it's the fact that they've given notice to the authority that they don't require an education, and then it's around those informal and formal networks and events to support them. But
I just think when you're in a school and you've got an EHCP, there's so much support that the student gets, and I just think if they're electively home educated, are they getting any support? Are the parents getting it? And it's good, it's brilliant then. It's probably not brilliant that we're getting more statutory duties, but it's good that it's being highlighted in the report, maybe then that they're not.
No,
thank you for that.
You're right in the sense of equity, because you know, where you have a plan, the only duty if a child is electively home educated is to have an annual review, so to review the provision once a year. So I from my personal and professional view, is that a greater level of responsibility on actually providing support to those parents would be a positive.
Yeah, brilliant. My second question with regards to that table is that we have 3 students, it would appear, that are awaiting provision. Do we know what's happening with those students? It says awaiting provision of compulsory school age. We've got 3 students.
So at any given time, we will have assessments where they are where we are looking to make provision. So what I can say is that when I last checked with the team for September, we only have 1 young person for whom we have not confirmed a school or college setting. So at any point, and it may well be that it's just not agreed or parents haven't gone through the process. So in terms of children out of education, again, I'm very satisfied that where there is a breakdown of placement or a need for new provision, we work as quickly as we can. The issue for us is not the fact that we don't have funding, it's not the fact that we don't get our assessments, but there is a pressure on placements. And so as a percentage, our special school placements have gone down as an overall percentage of our placements. But if you look at the table that shows the numbers in the primary sector, and indeed at Ravenscliffe in the secondary sector moving through to post-16, that what we don't have is provision. So at Ravenscliffe, we're building additional post-16 for hopefully for implementation in September 23. So it's really about a pressure on places because of the increased numbers of plans.
Fab. And then my last question is just more with regards to, I was reading, I think it was chapter 2 of it, and I was looking at how they want to have this SEND partnership set up with early years and post-16, and it talks a lot in this report in like in 2.5 and 2.8 about having an inclusion group. Are we then ahead of the game a little bit perhaps with this SEND partnership, would you say, in Calderdale? Or if not, are we ready to go with having this really comprehensive SEND partnership?
What I would say is that we've got the ingredients for our recipe, but what we need to be able to do is balance the quantities and move forward. So Calderdale has started to prepare for the new inspections because we've got an inspection framework, and the government have been very clear to us that we shouldn't wait to start taking action. So we are working with partners in health and social care to develop that. What they're alluding to is something that we don't have at the moment, and that is a regional framework as well as a national system. So we're waiting to see what that looks like to be able to implement it. But the West Yorkshire region is a very strong network. I joined in January, and I've been very impressed at the amount of cross local authority work that happens with the SEND agenda.
Fab, thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And could I just add on, I recognise and respect, David, that perhaps the home education side isn't specifically yours, but I think it will be good for the directorate perhaps to give to us some data on that area, because there does seem to be a whole load of interest represented in that area. So could I ask Sue or to look into that for us, and please put some information our way when you're able to produce it. Thank you. Moving on.
Councillor Evans, can I just come in on that, please? I have just dropped something into the chat to say there is a report coming on children missing education and electively home educated children, a full report in September, so you will get plenty of data on it there.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah. Thank you for that. Moving on to other questions. Councillor Monteith, Brenda, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's on the same table that Felicity was referring to, and down the table it says it's to do with breakdown of Calderdale placements, and one of the headings is other arrangements by local authority. Could somebody give me some indication of what that means, because I can't imagine what that is.
Okay, so if I come in, so within the code of practice, we're allowed to, or parents are allowed to request a personal budget. And so it may well be that the young person isn't able to access, for instance, the local Calderdale College, but still it's still appropriate to access an individualized package. So by arrangements by local authority, that covers a wide range of provision that makes it much more of an individualized package for the young person. So we have a number of providers who can build up a 5-day offer for a young person that's not necessarily in the one place. So saying that they were at a particular provider wouldn't give the detail that you require. So it's an individualized package which is outlined within the Education, Health and Care Plan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dorrans, Danielle, you have a question. You got a hand up, I think?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I ask a couple of questions, if possible?
Please, away, yeah.
I will just declare that I am one of the committee members for the Calderdale National Autistic Society at this point. It's not a peculiar interest, but it's another interest. One of the references I wanted to ask is when we're stating that we have a higher than national average of children in mainstream schools, and then once we've heard people kind of responding in some of the comments, it's been we're struggling because of placements and moving children, and particularly around the EHCPs and exclusions. I just wonder how much that can be considered a positive, or are we reflecting with that? Because whilst we may have more SEND children in mainstream schools, how much of a success story is that for those children that are there? So I'm happy for somebody to respond to that, and then I'll ask my second question if that's okay, Chair.
Okay.
Yes.
You have to share for me to respond?
Please.
Yeah, so so you're certainly right, Councillor Durrance, there's more work to be done. So what we've got in train is that it's our intention to provide additional training for autism for all early years settings, schools, colleges and services within the council. And that's through an organisation called the Autism Education Trust. So we've bought into the package and all of our specialist teachers have been trained, and that what we need to do in all things is to ensure that, as it said in the green paper, that we provide the right support at the right time. So it's right place, right time. And the earlier we can do that, potentially the better the impact for the young person. So, and I'll just sort of reflect back to another comment that in terms of the provision made, we are looking at hubs for the special schools, additional resource provision, and in fact at Rastrick High we're building an autism unit where they will have links with the mainstream in order to address what we see as a deficit within our provision because of capacity. So our current additional resource provisions for autism are being oversubscribed, so we're struggling to provide the places, and Rastrick have agreed, following a building programme, to host another autism hub. So it is a matter of working at all fronts, but as the green paper is expecting us to do, we need to ensure that we put in that support and infrastructure and training as early as we can.
Thank you. Can I just come back quickly on that before my second point?
Danielle, just to say, what numbers of autistic students are we talking about going into that extension?
We're looking at between 16 and 25, up to 30 maximum. And what we've done is that with the build, it will give us progressive capacity. So we're working with the school to identify numbers, so it's on a site which is adjacent to the main building, and so students can access mainstream classes where appropriate, but they've got that separation in terms of giving them the security to allay anxiety and things.
Interesting, and some good numbers there. Sorry, Danielle, please carry on.
No, it's fine. I just wondered if we are making the switch, the shift to neurodiverse rather than compartmentalizing just autism, knowing that it's very commonly linked to ADHD. Are we making that kind of umbrella of both, or is it specifically ASD?
So are you happy for me to take this again, Chair?
Yes.
So there is a neurodiverse steering group, and in fact I attended a meeting only today about it, but what there still exists in Calderdale are the children's pathways for ASD and ADHD. So you're right in identifying there is that movement towards looking at the neurodiversity within the population. But in Calderdale, as it stands at the moment, there are still those ASD and ADHD pathways for children. But I think as the work progresses, that will come under review.
Within the provision, David?
Within the provision, well, yeah. I think so one of the things the current system requires of us is to identify the lead need for the child. And I think you're right, we fall into the trap of identifying via that lead need, whereas actually that can be an umbrella term that covers a diversity of facets for that particular child. So it'll be interesting to see what recommendations come out in the next phases following the review. And Calderdale Voice, the Parent Carer Forum, was very active in working in our response to that green paper. So in the sense of how that works with the national system, we've yet to know.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, I should also say I am on that steering group under the NAS group, and I am on the Family Voice. I'm sorry, that slipped my mind. So
No, thank you. No.
Thank you. My next comment or question is, and you might need to kind of hang around with this one, it's under 2.4 on page 18. On the bottom paragraph, it says, consideration should be given to ensure that local needs, solutions and the local voice of parents and carers is given due consideration with a national system. I wondered if we could kind of draw further into that and reflect on parents being given an opportunity to look at a local system and the delivery and how they feel that Calderdale are delivering their SEND service. And then additionally to that, whether that could be expanded to look at, I guess, facts and figures on how many children with SEND are making progress. And if we do have the figures to pull further into how many, not just with SEND that are being excluded, but how many have continued into further education, and being able to reflect whether there's a pattern for those that have a plan earlier, whether the ones that remain in mainstream have better successes, whether the ones in resource provision or specialist provision, whether they're educated locally or out of borough, or the more specialist provisions. But to show, do we have any information around that? Do we have any case studies to really draw down on which of our children with SEND, with whichever support that's been put in and at what stage, what the outcomes have been? And if we don't, is there any opportunity to do that?
Are you able to respond to that, David?
Yeah, so I think, as the green paper said, overall the outcome for children with SEND is disproportionately poor, which is, that is certainly the case. I think within that you can, you could look at case studies where there has been, a huge success, but also where there have been challenges. So the data that we have tends to be quite broad. One of the things that the proposals have been clear, that even if young people are in a very high cost placement, the outcomes aren't disproportionately better. So you're not getting greater value because you're spending more. So I think that fortunately within Calderdale, that we've got a dedicated schools grant and a high needs block funding, which we work within the budget, where many authorities have got a significant overspend. And the issue is, as the paper has said, is making sure that we've got that right support. And I think that how we measure that is not just based on educational outcomes alone. So the preparation for adulthood agenda and engagement with economic activity is also important. So again, although the recipe is there within Calderdale, certainly I know that the number of places in terms of internships and apprenticeships for young people who are approaching young adulthood is not sufficient. So we have to look at how we measure things. I think you're right, and educational outcomes are one way, but also engagement is another way of looking at it. So I think there's certainly a window of opportunity within the new framework that we would be given to take a good look at what we do and how we do it.
So that might be offered from when obviously everything's finalised, to kind of see how, because that was my other point about further engagement, because we know that young people with SEND are much likely to be in employment. So it would be interesting to unpick the pre-story to see which of the young people have been able to maintain employment or more independent living, and kind of go back and see their story before. I think that's the point I was making, but thank you, David. That was a good answer. Not a good answer, sorry, that answered what I needed it to. Sorry, thank you.
You've got a tick there, David. That's good. Councillor Atkinson, Joe, you've been very patient. Please put your question.
Thanks, Chairman. It's just a quick one really around those pupils that are permanently excluded. Is it possible to get a more detailed breakdown of who these pupils are in terms of hotspots across Calderdale, or gender or age? Because it's very difficult to measure whereabouts this has happened if you don't see the data. You understand that? Did you hear me?
Shall I come in on that one, Councillor Evans?
Appropriate, yes.
Yes, we can provide, obviously we wouldn't want to give the details of individuals, but we can provide more information to you on ages, the year groups, and the reasons for those exclusions in particular bands, because the exclusions come in particular bands. So we can do that by gender and various other aspects. That is possible.
Joe, was there a particular reason you wanted to ask that question?
No, it was just really to see, because obviously if you don't see the pattern, it's difficult to intervene a little earlier before the exclusion happens. So if it's a particular group that we need to be more worried about than other groups. So just really around that.
Yeah, I mean, early intervention is an important aspect in many of these things, isn't it? So yeah. I understand what you're saying. I don't see any other hands raised. Have I missed anybody? Don't think so. I just have one sort of more general question from a sort of staffing point of view. Am I right in assuming that within SEND provision we have a reasonably high staff turnover? And is this having any impact in terms of the service offered to those who require SEND support? Is that something for you?
So
that's probably one for David, I think, because he's got the more hands-on.
Do you mean in the schools or in the council service?
Within the council setup, I got the impression somewhere I picked up that there was quite a high turnover, and I was wondering whether that was having any impact on provision.
I think turning over staff is always an issue because you lose knowledge and you know that. What I can say is that, you know, those staff who've left since I joined have all left for valid reasons, either for promotions, opportunities elsewhere in terms of geographically. So I think one of the things that Calderdale has been very good from my perspective in doing is supporting my requests for additional staffing, particularly at a management level, but also at an officer level within the service. So we have been able to put in place a number of additional posts in order to help with capacity. So I don't think from exit interviews or in terms of any negative reasons as to why people are leaving the SEND world. It's a very challenging world to work. It's a very demanding world in that each of our officers, we aim to have around 220 cases. And so if I give you an illustration, at the moment that between now and Christmas, we will be issuing 2 plans potentially every working day, and that's on top of the existing plans which we have to manage. So in order to support the team, we've been able to propose that we get some additional capacity for plan writers, a senior SEN officer, and we've got additional caseworkers, particularly to help us with communication, which I recognise is a challenge for us. And that's something that we're working to resolve towards September. So I think it's a good question. It does impact because, you know, I think that having the same officer for the school and for you as a parent, you build a relationship, and that's strong. But actually, in terms of the service changes, most people have left in order to gain an opportunity or a promotion, and have not moved on because they just simply don't want to work in Calderdale in Send. So I think the world of Send is challenging.
Somewhere that there was a bit of a turnover, and I wondered what if any impact it was having. From what you said, David, it seems to be being managed as all these things do. There's always churn within departments, and it would appear it's being managed and not having a particular impact on those requiring service. So thank you very much for that.
No, pleasure.
Anything else, Julie? Do you want to add anything to this, or Sue? I think we've asked all the questions we need to.
Thanks, Councillor Evans. That's fine.
Yep, thank you. If we may move on then to the next item, update on young people's service. We undertook a review back in 2019, and following our meeting in July, we requested a report on the progress of the service since the review, with specific detail on outcomes in that. Julie, you've got Di Jury there, I think, also.
That's right.
Who's going to pick this one up for us?
Yeah, I'll let Di introduce herself, and she's also got John with her from the Young People's Service. I'll let them both introduce themselves and take it away from there. Thank you.
Hello, Di Drury, Assistant Director for Early Intervention and Safeguarding. I'll let John introduce himself as well. Might be on mute, John.
It was all going so well.
I know.
So I'm John Greenwood, and I'm the Operations Manager for Young People Services in Calderdale.
Excellent. Hi, John. So who's going to kick off on this particular item?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Councillor Evans, if that's okay. So yes, so the Young People's Service obviously sits under my portfolio of services, and Sharon Field, who is the service manager, would have been here this evening, but unfortunately she's on holiday at the moment. Not unfortunate for her. I think she's having a nice time in Greece, but unfortunate for us that Sharon can't join us. And she's done a lot of work with John and with her service to sort of craft this report, which I think is a comprehensive report, and does give you a lot of information, I think, about the range of services that are being delivered to young people in Calderdale. So just a few of the highlights. It's obviously a lengthy report, so I was only just going to mention a couple of things, and John obviously can come on after me and say a bit more. But I guess the service has obviously, like all services, struggled a little bit, you know, with that recovery from the pandemic. I think trying to make sure we see young people face to face, I think that's been a key change for the service. And I think what we found is most young people prefer, you know, to engage face to face. They might spend a lot of their time on phones and technology, but they clearly preferred face to face support and interaction with services trying to support them. So that's been one of our sort of key areas to work on in the service. You've got within the report hopefully quite a range of outcomes in detail for each part of the service. I do apologise, I've got an eye that's watering, sorry, at the moment, so it's just blurring me a bit. The range of services that fall within the young people services, so you know, the services which are targeted youth and family support, support to young carers, the play service, the voice and participation team, and the open access support. So there's a whole range of services there, and I think, you know, the report, as I say, it does go into detail in terms of each part of the service and how it's progressing. I think what's also fair to say is a recognition that some areas of the service recognise there are some areas for development and some areas where we want to improve reach to young children, and we want to engage more young people, you know, within some of the work that we're doing. And in terms of young carers, we've seen an increase in assessments, so increased demand for the young carers service and those assessments, but we have increased capacity as well to the service. There are some areas that colleagues, members on the call might want to inquire about more. Of course, we're happy to take your questions. John, do you want to say anything at this stage? Thanks.
I think the only thing I'd add is just recognition for the entire staff team in young people service at the start of COVID, because the service didn't miss a beat when it came to dealing with and offering support to young people. Right from day one, we had workers out on the streets, in parks, supporting and encouraging young people alongside the police to stay home, not be playing on the swings, and just keeping themselves safe. So I just think I'd like to have that acknowledged, really, that they did a cracking job.
Good, that's good to hear. Helen, I think you've got your hand up on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for the report. Couple of questions and a comment. One that I think are always important to give credit where it's due, and in terms of the open access, I've heard very positive things about New Ground and the work that they're doing at Forest Cottage. So that's obviously really good to hear. But as ever is a sort of a downside, I think they also do seem to both feel quite isolated, and also they are countering quite a lot of challenges. So there seem to be, and I don't know if this is general, but this is the feedback I'm getting, is that there are quite a number of young people attending open access provision who perhaps have, a fairly challenging needs and really perhaps need some support beyond that. So I'm just wondering how these perhaps can work within the system and how these can link up if there are people in open access who really need something more targeted. I think the other question I would like to ask in terms of open access is this the full range of, and now I don't know whether we know that or is this outside the remit of whether there are other informal youth provision growing up. My experience of being involved with, various organisations in my ward is there were quite often groups that were off the radar. Now, I know we don't know what we don't know, but I am just wondering, because clearly the serious safeguarding issues in terms of knowing what youth provision is there and, and to ensure that all the safeguarding issues are met. So basically, I suppose that there's two main bits of the questions. How do we link up with open access if something needs more than that? Is there a waving of support around that? And are we mapping any all informal provision?
Okay. Are you okay for me to go ahead then? So in terms of our commission services, and particularly New Ground, they are already integrated into Calderdale children and young people's early intervention services. There are members of staff from New Ground who sit on the panel every week, which is where the cases are allocated for individual support. And actually, it kind of goes the other way quite often, is young people come from other services and will get referred to New Ground for one-to-one support on a regular basis as well. So I would say that between us, we work hand in glove to make sure that those young people do get the appropriate support from the right people at the right time. We also support our commission services through the deployment of the council's young people service out of our youth work team, who are predominantly detached youth workers, but also endeavour to pay visits to the various youth centres that we have got across Calderdale, as well as linking up with their detached elements as well to offer additional support where there are particular hotspots. And examples that might be in the north, where Morrison's are having a particularly tricky period of time recently with a group of young people, and New Ground Young People Service, the police and wardens and such like, all collaborated really well together to try and get under that and prevent some of that stuff happening.
Thank you. Does that satisfy
Well, the other, and it might be a harder one to answer, and maybe the question wasn't clear, but I did, for example, refer to one gateway club here. I was aware, at least for a time, Forest Cottage, there was another one operating that I said was under the radar. I've also realised that through some churches, there seemed to be unofficial youth provision. And I just wondered whether we were aware, whether, you know, there's a way you could support that.
I was going to go on to answer that one. I just wanted to see if you had any comments on the first bit. So where we're up to with that is we are aware of.
Apologies for jumping in. I don't know that.
It's fine. There are a couple of kind of, if you like, informal youth groups that we're aware of. One in Sorby Bridge, sort of on the main road, top end of Chewell Lane, and one in Hebden Bridge. The one in both of them we've had contact with through Young People's Service, and are sort of building up those links and shared working where we can. But what we currently, going back to when we commissioned the youth services, we asked each of the bidders to put in a comprehensive mapping of the areas that they were going to deliver in, and there was very little kind of alternative kind of ad hoc youth provision in the areas. But what we're doing at this moment in time is we're preparing the kind of end of year report for the commission services. We've expanded on that kind of scoping exercise to review where there might be those hidden bits and bobs that you're discussing, and be able to identify where they are, what they do, and how they can link to what we're offering, and how we can maybe even offer them some support. The other thing we've also got in place at the moment, which I think will contribute to that, is another member of staff who's doing some mapping around family hubs in the geographical areas, and I think that will also help us to pull out if there's any bits of stuff that we might have missed through our own endeavours.
Does that cover things?
Yes, thank you.
Good, okay. Councillor Isseps, Felicity, I noticed your hand up, a couple more as well. Councillor Tremaine, Councillor Durrans as well.
Hi, thanks. I've got a couple of questions about the youth, the targeted youth and family service, and then a question just about the open access, if that's all right. So just because, to put it into context, when it talks in 2.2 about the youth and family service, and it talks about there being 75 sessions and 83 young people with 4.6 attending per session. Is this a good level of engagement with the service? Is this where we want the service to be, or is it higher, or is it lower than previous years?
Oh, sorry, you've got other question. Shall I wait to see if
No, you could answer that one, then I'll ask my next one. That's fine.
I didn't like to jump in. So that is not just the whole target youth and family service. That's talking about the target youth and family drop-in service, which operates 3 days a week out of the Orange Box in Halifax, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. So there's it's not the best engagement, but we have to remember these figures are for 2021-22, and so they kind of do sort of reflect a big chunk of the year where the centre wasn't open at all, and then the emergence of young people from lockdown into participation again. So I would say that we would then sort of say, no, we want more. And that's what we'd be working on. And some of the things that we have planned to kind of improve on that is to work harder on our kind of social media and promotion side of the world. And we're actually going out to recruitment for an additional member of staff, an apprentice, to help and support us do that.
Fab. Yeah, I would have thought, because I think these are really good services. If we get the word out there, I would have thought that we'd be more, because it'd be similar for when it talks about the Which Way Up group, because that seems where you're looking at emotional health and well-being, and we know there's a massive crisis with the emotional health and well-being of young people at the minute. I would have expected maybe that group to have a higher. So I think it's a really good plan then.
I think, on social media if I can, I mean, much of the figures around the Which Way Up group there are really around an online provision, which a lot of young people, when you think about the subject matter, it's not ideal, to be fair. We did what we could, and it kind of was about, I mean, normally that group would run for a 10-week period, and then on, you know, and roll on, roll off. On that particular group, they worked for 20 weeks because they recognised the approach wasn't ideal, and they needed that extra bit of something, so they extended the provision out. So again, the new groups for the target group work are recommencing on the next cohort on the 19th of September. And they're already, as far as I've been told, is fully subscribed in terms of numbers. But rather than doing a cohort that starts in one go and then goes for 10 weeks and ends, we're trialing a process of rolling on and rolling off so that we've got a consistently full potential group of young people.
Fab, that's great. The next one was just around the detached team, because you talked about there being an issue in Morrison's. I just wanted to flag an issue because obviously the Upper Valley comes out quite low in the number of sessions compared to other places. There is a Ryburn Reservoir, there is quite a big issue at the minute with regards to large groups gathering up there, so it might be useful for some of that team to pop in there. It has been flagged with the community safety wardens as well. I think there was an instance recently where there was over 100 young people up there and the West Yorkshire Police had to get involved. So just if you're looking for places where that team could possibly support, that would be a place.
Yeah. What I'd say about that is, I mean, I do normally hear about where there are particular hotspots because people come through to me quite often to say, we've got this going on. And that is often the community safety people. But if any elected member also feels there's something that wants a bit of attention, I'm more than happy for someone to come to me. The one caveat I'd put on that is if you've got 100 young people who the police are there to control, I'm not.
The police were that was quite an extreme example of it, to be fair.
Right,
but there is quite frequently large groups of young people up there, most of the time not really doing anything, but it would suggest to me that's because there isn't really anywhere else for them to go.
Yeah.
And I know that they won't always go to a youth club provision because sometimes they don't want to, but it's just an area that could maybe.
Yeah, what I can add to that is it's predominantly the work of the out of hours team is on foot detached work, but again, we've just recently got the mobile units kind of cleaned up, polished and serviced and ready to go, so that we started to use them a little bit more. So I can certainly direct the vans up to that area, and we'll get some mobile youth work out the back of our mobile units with laptops and cups of tea and various bits of activity.
Yeah, that'd be fab. And then the last thing is just around the open access, because it talks in 2 point, and I know that these are coming up for a review now, aren't they? Because is it like been a year or something, and there's a it just talks about how there was an expression of interest, but nobody returned one for the Upper Valley. Is that because were you looking for a provider there? For example, the providers like Himat and Newground. Is that what you mean? And nobody came back for that area.
That's correct. We put the tender details out on your tender or whichever system it is we use, but we also tried to share the opportunity out with as many local organisations as we were aware of, as it occurred, the Newground and Himat came through with the 3 areas, but there were nobody from that kind of valley area who came forward with any proposals through the tender process.
And what do you foresee the outcome of these evaluations to be on that? Do you think this is a programme that you'll pursue? Has it had a positive impact, do you think, or is it too early to tell?
The impact of the commissioned work on young people?
On the open access provision, yeah.
I would say that in the parts of the evaluation process that I've currently been involved in, there's a lot to celebrate and a lot to say, you know, that there's some real positives coming out of that work. And along with that, in any evaluation, you're going to find out where some of the weaknesses are. And I think as we go into sort of year 2 and potentially year 3, one of the tasks that we have is to sort of embrace those weaknesses a little bit and figure out how to turn them into strengths, basically. So that's the job of me and the commissioning team over the subsequent 12 months, I would say.
I would love to get in contact with you to see if we can pursue something like that for the Upper Valley, because it seems a shame that we couldn't. So, but thank you very much for all your answers. They've been great, really informative.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you. Councillor Tremaine, Diana, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm just following on from Councillor Izzard, really, actually, the similar point about the open access and the Upper Valley lack of the expressions of interest. And I think it would be really helpful. Obviously, we're in quite different areas from Councillor Izzard, but certainly in Todmorden, we've felt a real lack recently, I think, of some of that open access provision. And obviously there wasn't anyone submitting expressions of interest last time. So I guess I'm keen, along with my ward councillors and other Upper Valley members, to sort of think about how can we ensure that there are expressions of interest put in next time, and that does happen, because obviously it's a pretty large chunk of Calderdale that's not really having that need met at the moment. And I guess otherwise, I'll probably drop you the odd email, John, and I'm sure that the wardens have been in touch about, we have certainly had some kind of antisocial behaviour hotspots and things recently where, there have been perhaps issues, and I think people are feeling that lack of the kind of open access provision perhaps contributes a little bit. It's never that simple, but having something in place where people can regularly drop into, I think would be a real benefit.
I think in sort of response to that, what I will say is whilst we recognise that there's no open access provision out in Todmorden, what we are doing is providing quite a bit of mobile unit and detached work in Todmorden. And I was really pleased actually that our detached youth workers ended up on the publicity for the Antisocial Behaviour Week, which kind of demonstrates that real quality partnership we have with the police and the communities in the area. And my two members of staff who were out there quite regular are, I think they're probably quite notable. Last summer, it was really pleasing when they just came up with an idea to have a football tournament over 8 weeks, and they negotiated with Todd Centre and had loads of young people down there. They got trophies. It was just buzzing. And so whilst recognising no open access, it's not neglected or forgotten by the service. We are trying to put what we can in down there. It's a real shame there wasn't an agency that would come through when we put those tenders out, because I'd have loved to see something take off down there, possibly from the college with the new providers there. And I think I did drop them a line at the time to say, look, this is coming through, keep your eyes open for it,
Yeah, I think it is a bit worrying when you don't have a response to a tender there, and then maybe we need to look at ways in which we can generate some response in the areas where we've got the gaps, rather than, with all due respect, just accept that we haven't had a response. I understand what you're saying, John, in terms of your vans up there and people are doing things anyway, but I think we just have to be a little bit careful. We don't just sort of forget about it if we don't get a response from people. I'm sure you're not doing that, but I think I just make that general observation. Coming on to Councillor Durrans, Danielle, you've been waiting very patiently on this one.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered about the reference of open access and what we're looking at to consider the barriers for some people. We had a conversation at our local Safer, Cleaner, Greener group about some agencies needing to kind of step up because of some of the problems from North Halifax around antisocial behaviour. But there was previously a youth group that was provided from Calderdale for people with ASD. I don't think that's running anymore, but I would suspect that when I was having the conversation at the Safe Cleaner Greener last week, it would be a huge barrier for some of our young people who have autism to attend some of the open access. So whilst it might be referenced as open access, it might not be as open to some people as we would expect that it could be for others. And I just wondered if that's been considered or addressed. And then back on to what Ashley said, Councillor Evans, when tenders are not necessarily addressed, how active are people in seeking certain groups in order to deliver these? Because the Calderdale National Autistic Society has started to pick up with some of their provision, but that's run solely on volunteers who are obviously quite overwhelmed themselves, particularly with children with additional needs. So I just wondered if that was being considered in another way.
In terms of the first part of your question, we do have one piece of work that's based at the Orange Box, which has predominantly a focus on ASD. That's called Loving Every Minute, and it operates every Monday evening. Off top of my head, it says either Monday or Thursday. We have two groups in Orange Box that cover people with additional needs, and I'm sure it's the Monday one is Loving Every Minute, and that's designed around kind of having a quiet space where people with those particular difficulties can go and engage. And then the Thursday group is sort of slightly more boisterous. It's a lot busier. It's more like a youth club for people with additional needs. But so we have got a little bit of that offer within the borough. Orange Box is the only space I have nowadays since we went through the restructure and commissioned some of those works out. But so that's why it's located there, you know. So that was that. The second bit. Sorry, I've lost my plot a little bit. What was the second part of that question? Around the commissioning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult. I found it really difficult when we went out to tender. It happened at pace. So you know, we kind of put the tenders out, and then you work to a very clear timeline, and you've got to work within the commissioning guidelines as well. So there's only so much you can do in terms of how much you can push on people to take up the offer, because it has to be seen to be a fair and equitable thing that people have gone for off their own backs, really. So I had to be a bit cautious about how I approached people I knew might have an interest without it seeming like I had an interest in them. But after the fact, what I did talk to a couple of people who I felt if we were to reissue the tender again, that they might have an interest in it, because I think it was the group who drawn down the quite a large amount of money to revitalise Todmorden, and we had a couple of conversations with them, but then ultimately the decision made to sort of put the additional provision into the north, so that kind of ceased at that point.
Could we get? Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, I'll finish off.
Could we get a list of the provision that's offered, because I wasn't aware of the Loving Every Minute, and it's something that I do get asked for about, particularly after COVID, and then just if you could, just going back, not necessarily just on autism, but when you are looking at delivering these services, how do you address the accessibility? Is this a consideration when it's going out to tender? Is that something that's considered if it is open access?
Yeah, I've got in terms of what we've got on offer, I've got a kind of an A4 grid that has all the various bits of stuff that Young People Service offer, along with its commission partners. So I'm quite happy to share that via Lauren, I guess. Would it be Lauren?
Thank you.
Anyway, I'm sure she will.
Thank you.
There was a bit more to your question, though, wasn't there? There was
about the open access and inclusivity, I think, John, wasn't it, from Councillor Durans, about making, how do we ensure that the groups and the open access groups are fully inclusive? I think that's what you were trying to say, wasn't it, for any young people with additional needs? That would be part of the commissioning offer, I guess, John, wouldn't it?
That's where I was just getting to, really. As part of that commissioning framework and the responses and the tenders that come in, there is the element of inclusivity across a range of different recognised needs.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Lauren's having a problem with her microphone. She can hear us, but she can't speak. But I'm sure she won't have an issue with circulating anything.
Right, thank you very much for that. Yes, when I noticed something upcoming saying I can't speak, I thought she'd lost her voice. She can speak, but we can't hear her. Yeah, I mean, in that context, Danielle, I had that concern which I expressed where we get gaps because people don't respond, and I think it's an important area. All I would also say is, and I respect what you're saying, John, but talking to local councillors, they may have contacts with people, they may be able to influence people. Come and talk to the individual councillors, I think, in the area, because they may know people. And similarly, I understand your desire not to be seen to be preferring somebody you might know, but if we as councillors come up with somebody, then it sort of opens the whole thing up. And I just hate to think there were gaps that we weren't taking every opportunity to try and fill effectively. So not a criticism.
No, I think that's a fair point, Chair. Thanks, very fair point. Take that one.
Thank you. Did I see anybody else there? Adam, have you got your hand up there? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just in response to the questions about the evaluation and whether we could look at provision in other areas, certainly we can when we come to evaluate the pilot and in particular look at Upper Valley provision again. But just basically just wanted to sort of manage expectations a little bit really and just say this isn't a huge pot of money that we've got to provide this provision, unfortunately. And, you know, one of the major drivers of why we had to move to this sort of commission model rather than the previous structure of the youth service was because we're having to make savings in CYP. And this, you know, this is one of the few areas that we unfortunately are able to look at making savings because we've got such huge pressures, as you know, in other areas, such as with sort of external placements and things like that. So yeah, whilst we will look at it, you know, the idea that we might have sessions running in Tom Modern and Ryburn and carry on doing all the ones we're doing in North Halifax is probably not realistic. In recent years, I read recently that I think 95% of the money that government provides for youth services has gone into the National Citizenship Service, which I visited recently with Holly Lynch. And that is a really good programme. And I was really impressed with some of the work that they do. But it is only for a very limited amount of time in school holidays, which sort of begs the question of, you know, what are these young people supposed to do throughout the rest of the year? And I did meet a young person from Elland actually who was basically saying to me how fantastic the programme was, but then there's nothing for him to do the rest of the year in Elland. So yeah, it's something we do need to look at, but I just wanted to sort of manage expectations there and provide a bit of context as to, you know, why we've had to sort of restructure the service in the way that we have. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, Adam. I think it's a very valid point to make for us. Julie, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in on this one?
I would. Thanks very much, Councillor Evans. Yes, just to let members of Scrutiny know and Councillor Wilkinson, we did have a discussion about the youth services budget yesterday at my management meeting with our finance officer, and we're looking to see if there is any way that we could utilise some funding to put a commission out for the Upper Valley. So it's just to let you know, we are looking at it. As you know, as Councillor Wilkinson said, money is very tight, but we are aware because we couldn't find a provider for Upper Valley that doesn't feel fair. So it is something that we are looking to address because we commissioned over a certain period of time. That's going to come to an end, and it is something that we do want to address. So just to let you know, we are looking at that, and I'll obviously brief you further on that when we've got more detail.
Good, thank you for that, much appreciated. Can't see any other hands. I've just got a sort of general thing, one of my little hobby horses. The report had got a huge amount of information on it. You know, you were describing the number of interventions made here and there, and there are some very big numbers there. So obviously somebody's doing a heck of a lot of work, which is very pleasing to see and very impressive. I just wonder, and this is where my hobby horse bit comes in, do you have specific targets that you want to achieve in certain areas, or time scales by which you want to achieve things? It's one of, as I say, it's a hobby horse of mine that I would think it's accepting there are financial pressures or a lack of finance. Do we outline areas where we feel that we're perhaps not doing what we could or should be doing? Are we setting timescales to achieving certain things? Are we setting numbers that we want to try and achieve? Or are we just thankful for all the work we're doing and having some good effects? I just feel there's an appropriateness for specific targets and knowing whether we've achieved them and whether we need any help to achieve them.
I think from my perspective, from my perspective and managing the youth service, we found it really difficult through COVID to have a coherent target structure because we just didn't know how things were going to pan out and work, and it was very sporadic with the online stuff. When we sort of came out of COVID and we'd implemented the restructure, which was a complicated process, and getting the new outcomes framework properly embedded, what I did was to say for year one, we were just going to graft and do as jobs and work out how well we could achieve with what we had and what we've done. And that's where those figures are that you see currently. But I think year two, or this coming year, is going to be so significantly different. But what we're going to sort of basically say is whatever we did last year, we want to double it. Is really a good kind of sense of where we want to be, because we have to acknowledge it was limited. It was very basic, and the staff team needed a certain degree of development to get them up and running up to full steam. So that's a kind of basic principle. And I think once we've kind of got a full set of proper data for a year, it'll be year on year assessment of what that data looks like, what it means, and I think to continually improve and increase and figure out ways of doing that.
And focus on areas where there are gaps, like the Upper Valley and stuff like that, which should be in higher.
Absolutely, that's definitely the plan, is to build on each year and set targets to really stretch us, so that we're continually finding ways to do things better, more efficient, and just get to more people. Basically, that's what we really want to do, is get to as many young people as possibly can and offer a massive range of services.
And it makes the scrutiny job a lot easier, because we can scrutinise specific things, can't we?
And just to add, if I can, Councillor Evans, I think John's already said it, but there is a new outcome framework in place, and I think it's also looking at the outcomes for young people. So it is about reach, but it's also about their social, emotional development, and supporting them into education, into employment, and a whole range of factors, as the report suggests. So I think John's right. I think a year's worth of data, we'll have a baseline, won't we? Really, we'll have a baseline from which we know what we're achieving already, and then the target setting for the following year will be easier in terms of how much more we want to achieve and how we're going to evidence those good outcomes as well.
Yeah, excellent, good. I look forward to that. Thank you very much for that. Please take that as a positive comment rather than a negative one, but it'd be good to be able to work along those lines. So thank you very much. I don't see any other questions on this particular item, so thank you for those who have put an input. Shall we move on to item 7, the third major item for this evening, family hubs and the Start of Life programme. An update was requested in relation to the Family Hubs programme and things like that, the Education Family Hubs programme. So I've got Julie down for this, and Ben, I think, although I haven't seen Ben.
Ben is here, Councillor Evans.
Hello, Ben.
Yeah, Ben's here. I'm going to hand over to him. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry
about that. Where you go.
Thanks, Chair. I've got some slides, actually. I think Lauren was just going to get them up. There we go, as if by magic. So first of all, apologies for me for not sending these in advance. I got wiped out last week by COVID, so I'm playing catch up. So I would normally have shared them in advance. I will share them with you afterwards, or Lauren will share them with you afterwards. I think the first thing to say is really important is it's the way we're approaching it in Calderdale as a family hubs programme. It's not just about family hubs as buildings and assets. It's a way of delivering better outcomes for children, young people and families in Calderdale through kind of a broad range of interventions, which will kind of gather together in the family hubs model. Next slide, please, Lauren. So the things that we know already, we were approached as a local authority to express an interest in family hubs. So we were picked because of our relative deprivation, and that's good. I think we would wanted to apply anyway, but we received an invite to take part. Now the deadline for applying actually is this October, and there's a process to go through to get there, and I'll run through a bit of that. But in essence, it entails us showing that we're ready to be able to progress family hubs and meet a certain number of criteria to do that. It's really important to say that this isn't about a local authority, this is about Calderdale as a place. So it's integration in the context of bringing together a number of things that happen in local authority, a number of things that happen through local authority commission services, a number of things that happen in the NHS, a number of things that happen through the voluntary community sector, and also tapping into the power of our residents as well, and the number of things that that they bring. Because actually, when it comes down to it, who has the most impact on children and young people's outcomes? It's the families and the households that they live with. It brings with it additional income of about £3 million. Now that sounds lots, but that's spread over 2.5 years, and in public health alone, we spend more than £3 million a year on children and young people, and that's just one little bit of the system. So it's not a huge amount of money, and it's only up until the end of March 25. So it's transformation money rather than new service money, really. It doesn't mean we can't use it to change the way we do some services and use it as a way of priming a transformational journey. But it's not a question of saying, well, that's £3 million worth of new services in Calderdale, because come March 25, we haven't got any money after that to make that recurrent. So sustainability is really important in that context in terms of what we do. As I said, really, it's about an ethos and a culture of how we do things. And it's about the totality of the offer, not just what happens in a building. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think it's important to say that Family Hubs is more than just saying, oh, I get this service in this building. It's more about saying our outcomes for children, young people and families in Calderdale will be improved by doing X, Y and Z. Next slide, please, Lauren. So I'm not going to read through this. That's the national thing about what Family Hubs are. You'll have this when we send the slides out. You'll be able to refer back to this if that's okay. But you can see it covers the range from 0 to 19 brackets 25. And a particular focus on the Start for Life offer. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the funding's broken down, but there's about 80% of the funding is earmarked for that 0 to 1 year old bit of the pathway, actually. So a lot of it is about transforming that first year in life and the preconception bit and conception bit that comes with it. Next slide, please. So the 3 main goals for the national programme, what they want to see in Calderdale is that the way we do things is more accessible to families, and there's a clear single point of access into the system rather than being bounced around the system from pillar to post. Things are better connected, so we've got services and partners and the people who live in Calderdale working together. And they understand the interdependencies between the different bits of the system, rather than, again, you need to go to this place to see somebody for this and you need to go to the other place to see somebody for something else. I think something we're all quite familiar with in that context. And much more relationship centred, so being listening, supportive, trusted, working on meeting families' needs, but also working on getting the most out of families' assets and using those assets elsewhere, so particularly around things like peer support, which we do some of, but I think we could do more of. We do quite a lot of peer support breastfeeding, for example, but we don't do any peer supporting around perinatal mental health particularly, and that could be quite helpful. Next slide, please. There's a set of principles that underpin this. Again, I'm not going to read through them. They make a lot of sense. They're mostly around things that you normally expect in a multi-agency project, which tend to be around the way you work and the sort of people you've got working in the system, and about continuity of care as well. So people once they're in the system, stay in the system rather than dipping in and out of it and bouncing around and seeing lots of people telling their story about 1 million times. Next, please. National programme outcomes. Provide support to parents and carers so they're able to nurture their babies and children, improving health and education outcomes for all, supporting reduction in inequalities, and building evidence base for what works. Nothing new there. That's all stuff we do already. It's just trying to do it better and do it in a more joined up way. But we're not starting from a baseline where we're not doing any of this, and I think that's really important. Next, please. The other really important thing for me is that we're family focused. So thinking about what does it mean for me is really important, I think. And if I'm a family in Calderdale, I need to know where to go to access services and get the range of support I need. I need to know there's a range of support that works for me. I need to understand what's important for the well-being of my baby. These are really key things. And actually, if we're going to make a success of this, we need to be able to say that we're doing all of this, and people can say, "Yep, you're doing that. That's fine." So that this is really something we need to, hold up in front of ourselves as we're going through this process and say, if we don't get this bit right, we've failed. It feels really important to me that. Next, please. So Family Hub offer is based partly around what happens in a family hub in a building. Partly what happens elsewhere in the network in terms of outreach might be coordinated through a central hub, but delivered in an outreach way. And we do lots of this already. So we already have midwives and health visitors going into people's homes, for example. That's a form of outreach. And then there's the virtual offer, which I think many of us would agree has room for improvement in Calderdale. We've got lots of bits and pieces dotted around, but it's not a cohesive offer. And we've already started this work to work through how we can have much more of a cohesive offer. So there's a one-stop shop for families where they can go and find a range of information and get signposted appropriately if it's something that's beyond our scope and is held somewhere else, rather than having to go to multiple different websites. And I'm sure you've all tried to use the council website. It's not the easiest to find things on, is it, if we're honest about it? And it's a way of making things easier for people to access. It's also a way, I think, the virtual offer of around being able to deliver some of our services, but in a virtual way. So where you might have a limited resource, and we say, well, it's often delivered from Halifax or Central Halifax, and you have to come to Central Halifax. If you've got no money and you live in the Upper Valley, you're probably not going to get to Central Halifax to access that support. If we can do that in a virtual way, so you can speak to someone on a computer in an outreach post in the Upper Valley, then that would be a good way of approaching things, I think. Next, please. So in terms of what's in scope, again, I'm not going to read through all 24 of these, but you'll notice the discussion we've had today at Scrutiny, both SEND and youth services, both on that list, and a whole range of other stuff as well. And it's not saying that we'll stop doing everything we do for all of these things and start a completely different model. It's how do we say, if a family wants to speak to someone about youth services and wants a bit of advice about housing and wants to speak to somebody about oral health, there's a place they can go where they can get signposted to all of those places without having to go searching for in three different places for it. So I can't sit here and say and tell you now this is how it's going to look, but I can say all of these things will be part of that model. Next, please. The funding itself, just to give you an idea, very prescriptive about what it's spent on. The Family Hubs programme spend is about getting people in to make this happen, and supporting bits of the system to transform to make it happen. And that is targeted at 0 to 19s, bracket 25. The rest of it is all targeted at 0 to 1, apart from the home learning environment services, which is targeted at 3 to 4 year olds. So you can see it's a lot of the spend is weighted towards that very early start, and it's quite prescriptive about what it's to be spent on. Again, just to re-emphasise, we're doing all of this stuff already. It's about how do we do it better, and how do we bring various bits of the system together to make it more of a cohesive offer to parents and to children and young people, families. Next, please. So in terms of what our plan is at this stage, next, please. So I'm not going to read this out, but I think it ties in also with the next slide. Look, we're doing loads of stuff in Calderdale already. We've got a vision in Calderdale about ensuring everybody can live a larger life. We've got a wellbeing strategy with 2 key priority outcomes for children and young people, about being ready for school and about having hope and aspiration as they get a little bit older. And the Family Hubs programme for us is a way of us delivering on our vision and our outcomes that we've got in the wellbeing strategy. And ensuring that children can live their best life really going forward. Next slide, please. So we've got a set of ways of doing things already happening through Calderdale Cares in Calderdale. So joining up services, integration, a focus on prevention, trying to stop bad things happening if we can, addressing health inequalities, so looking at where the needs are and trying to meet those needs, and that can be inequalities in terms of protected characteristics, but it could be also inequalities in terms of where you live, or a particular cohort that you happen to be in, and something about ensuring that we've got empowered and resilient communities. And so engaging with the communities to help us design the best offer is going to be really important as part of this ongoing process. We're not there yet. At the moment, we just need to demonstrate, we need to get through to October to demonstrate that we can meet the competencies, but from then on, the next 2.5 years, working with stakeholders, but also working with our communities to help us shape what that looks like is going to be really important. Next slide, please. So 3 phases really. Phase 1, the preparatory phase, get the bid in, show that we've got partners engaged, show that we've got clear commitment in Calderdale for delivering this, and show that we have got some idea of where we might want to spend the additional resource that we've got. Not necessarily have it done in detail, but be clear that we're going to spend it in the way they want it spent, because that's their box that they need ticking. The delivery phase is that kind of 2.5 year period where we're successful in our bid and we can crack on with it. We'll end up splitting phase 2 into phase 2 A, B, C, D, I'm sure, because that's a big chunk of delivery and we want to phase some of that within that phase, if that makes sense. We'll want to do bits, some things we can do quicker than other bits, some things that will take us longer to get our heads around and integrate into it. And then really importantly, the phase 3, the sustainability phase, what's going to happen from 2025 onwards? We need to be having those plans in place now really, or shortly. As we're starting phase 2, we also need to be doing phase 3 really. So we need an exit plan for this, and we need to ensure that anything we do is sustainable and not going to end up in a position where in March 25 we've got bits of the system turned around saying, can we have some more money please, because we haven't got any more money. We need those conversations now about, well, if we're going to move money around the system, now's the time to do it. And that, that's all part of the whole ethos of integration and joining things up, isn't it? The mature system, really. Next, please. So these are the phase 1 milestones, and we're already cracking on with some of this. Again, you can refer back to this when you get the slide set through. Next slide, please. There's a whole series of things we have to do in the delivery plan, as you'd expect from a national programme. I don't think we'll have any issue with them. The main challenge for us at the moment is ensuring that people are signed up to be partners in this, and given it's a whole system delivery plan that we need to put forward. Next, please. So just in terms of governance and reassurance for you, really, just a bit of an idea of the things we need to do for October and how we're doing with them. So we've already done some of them, we're ongoing with others, and we've got a plan for doing the rest. I think the co-production and co-design bit, that will be very much focused on the stakeholders who are delivering services at this stage, and we'll shift much more to co-production and co-design with our residents after we've got through the first stage of getting past the October sign-off. So in September there will be some events, and we'll be inviting Scrutiny members to take part in that for CYP Scrutiny. So you'll have an opportunity to input into helping us to shape some of the parameters with which we're working forward. So we'll keep you in the loop as to when that is, and we'll make sure that Lauren sends that out to you. You don't have to, it's optional, but you may be interested in. Next slide, please. There's the number of risks and issues that we need to work through as a system. Some fundamentals about what should be delivered from a building versus what can we do virtually, and what needs to be outreach. Some fundamentals around workforce is a real challenge for us. Relatively small population, we're a relatively big geographical area, as a council means we end up spreading ourselves quite thin, and that's always been a challenge for us. And then there's always challenges around getting the comms right, and data and information sharing, and some interdependencies we need to work through. We've talked at Scrutiny before about children's centres, and there's clearly a discussion we need to have around what's the difference between a children's centre and a family hub, and what does that mean for the interdependencies between the two, and that will be part of what we do through some of the stakeholder events, and also working very closely with other people in Julie's team who are doing lots of work already on children's centres, and making sure we're a bit joined up rather than going off and doing separate things, really. Next, please. One of the things I just wanted to really get across is how important the doing with is, and will be going forward. So there's a whole load of stuff at the moment around consultation. This is what we need to do because this is what the national programme says we have to do at this point in time. Once we've got that sign off, I think we move much more towards the purple bit, the co-design and the co-production, working with families to help us shape what's going on, working with stakeholders to work through what's going on. So phase 2 will be very much a co-production phase. Phase 1 is more of a consultation engagement phase, I think, just because we need to be able to demonstrate we can meet the national team's ask at this point in time to release the funding to allow us to do what is right for Calderdale based on our residents. And it probably will feel a bit uncomfortable along the way for some of us as well, because if you do co-production right, it's going to feel uncomfortable. But it will probably lead us to a point where we're meeting the needs of families, children, young people better if we do it right. We're going to need to bring some expertise in to help us with this. We haven't got the capacity to do this, or probably the skills, if we're really honest about it. It's a particular skill set that you need to do co-production properly, and it's quite intensive. So we're working to bring in some extra capacity to support us with that. Next, please. A bit of governance. So there's a Family Hubs programme office, which links into a Family Hubs exec. Other people, so for example, Di sits on the exec, and others from the NHS bit of the world also sit on that. The reporting route is through to the Starting Well board, and Deb Harkins has taken a director lead on it for the council. And that reports through to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and the Health and Wellbeing Board ultimately have to sign off our applications. So that all makes sense from the governance perspective, I think. The Family Hubs Programme Office will also ensure that we get the council internal governance right, as well as other bits of the system, so that there's NHS internal governance right bits to deal with as well. And so that's where we'll ensure that Scrutiny is serviced in the way Scrutiny wants to be serviced on this topic. So if you want to call it in at any stage, and if you want updates at any stage, then come through Lauren, come to me, and we'll make sure that we do that for you. Next slide, please. That's it. Brilliant. So that's a whistle-stop tour. Lauren will send out the slides afterwards. I think the summary is there's lots going on to get us in a position where we can move forward with this. We don't know what it will look like at the moment. The stakeholder workshops in September will help us to shape a bit what it'll look like. But the ongoing work after that, when we've got our bid in and we've been accepted with the residents and with stakeholders in a lot more detail, will help us shape that offer and the product, if you like, in a lot more detail. I think what we are in a position now to be able to say is that we've probably got the right partners talking, and we need a pretty structured approach to ensure that we've got this moving forward. So a more detailed programme plan is being developed, and Di and I, for example, are having a chat on Monday to make sure that we're joined up on this, and we'll need to do that with others as well in the system, just to make sure that we've got a clear plan of how we're going to deliver this pretty complex piece of work. I'm going to stop, if that's okay, Chair, and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm very impressed with your post-COVID performance there. You're obviously struggling a little bit vocally. No criticism at all. That's admiration for you managing to get through it. And a very detailed, informative report. Thank you. I suppose the thing that really struck me about it was, and it was something I was thinking about before we started on this item, was the importance of integration, and you have stressed that so much that it becomes a non-question for me. It's just an ensure that it happens type question, because it's so important. And as I think you said towards the end of your presentation there, that if we're going to be able to continue to do it after the March 25, then the coordination has got to be there in order for us to be able to finance whatever we've developed over that period of time and make it continue to happen. So I take a lot of the points. The one question I would ask, or really it's a comment, is the disappointment with not you, but the system, the government process, which puts a huge amount of money, the vast amount of money, 0 to 1, although it's actually referring to 0 to 19 up to 25. What the heck are we going to do with all the post-1-year-olds with all of this? I'm sure there's no real answer to that, but I hope you will be able to come up with anything. I don't know whether you want to come back with any of that while I pick up on anybody who's got specific questions.
I will just come back on that. Julie and I might want to add to what I've got to say, but I think we already do a hell of a lot with all age groups in that kind of 0 to 19 bracket 25. And I don't think, although the extra funding may be coming in predominantly for 0 to 1s, I don't think this is an opportunity where we want to let pass to say, actually, no, it's, we'll just focus on 0 to 1s. I think we want to view this as an opportunity on focusing on all of the 0 to 19, 25. And given that we're doing loads already, the same principles apply actually. By doing integration, by focusing on prevention, by ensuring that we're focusing on inequalities and need, getting the targeted offer right and getting the universal offer right, and making things more joined up for families so that there's one point where they can get access to a whole load of support. Principles that we were doing before Family Hubs come along and we'd want to continue doing. Additional funding is always helpful. I think it is a shame that it's not been forthcoming for that kind of broader age range and seems to be very focused on 0 to 1s. That doesn't mean necessarily that we can't be creative about how we do things. So there are things that we might want to do for 0 to 1s which will have an impact on other age groups as well, if we're smart about it. And I think that there's a lot of very smart people in Calderdale who know lots about 0 to 19s, and bringing those brains together, I think between us we should be able to work through a model that takes us forward into the future without relying on extra funding, but make the most of the funding we've got.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's reassuring. I can't see any other questions coming up. Are we just accepting this as just a wonderful presentation, or have we got any comments or questions to ask? It would appear not. There's a thumb going up there from Councillor Munty, so I think we are. I'm gobsmacked, as you can probably tell by there are no questions whatsoever apart from my little comments there. I really look forward to this all happening. I think it's a great step forward, dare I say, by our government, with its limitations that we've highlighted. Being involved in health and well-being, I look forward very much to it coming to that as well as being part of the process. And I also look forward to, would encourage members of the board to take the advantage of getting involved in the planning stage that Ben referred to, which we're coming up later in the year. If we don't get involved and make our thoughts known, then we can't complain about it. It's a bit like not voting. If you don't vote, you can't complain about the council you've got. So get involved, please, and work with it. Any further comments that Julie or any of your colleagues, Ben, would like to make?
I think Councillor Evans, because it's early days, you've had such an informative presentation from Ben. He's really got a grip of this as chair of the executive. So yeah, I think he's done such a good job at laying out what's going to come, and we really are at the beginning stages of this. I'm sure it is one that you'll probably want to keep a watching brief on once we've done our submission. Okay. So, I know you're going to talk about your work programme next. So it may be just thinking through with Lauren and yourselves as Scrutiny board members, do you want something back on in 6 months' time, for example, just to keep a kind of watching brief on all of this as well. Thanks, Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Ben. Good presentation, well put together. So thank you for those. We move on. I don't know how Lauren's fixed in terms of speaking to us at the moment, because she
I'm
normally...
hoping you can hear me, Chair.
We can hear your dulcet.
Excellent news.
So perhaps you would like to take over item 8, work programme, for us.
Yeah, just to say that the work programme members have received is the most up-to-date one. I think we're pretty full up now until December, when we've got a little bit of wiggle room, so to speak. So obviously, as we always say, any new items, any amendments to items, always welcome. Got a few notes from the discussions this evening, so I'll build that in and share that with members. And it's probably just worth updating the board as well on the school food detailed review, just to say that that went to Cabinet on Monday. Thanks, Councillor Evans, for taking that. And we're expecting something back from Cabinet in a written form, so we'll schedule that in as soon as that's ready. And then just on the home education and children missing, we've got a report coming in September. And we did discuss that might develop into a focused piece of work or a detailed review, but we'll wait for that discussion to take place and then see how members want to pick that one up, if that's okay.
Yep, I'd certainly be interested in discussing the possibilities there.
Thank you.
Yep, and nothing else on the work programme, then? In terms of other members of the board, anything you particularly want to raise at this point in relation to the work programme? Can't see any responses. The only other question I've got here is whether we continue to have our meetings in this format, or whether there is a great desire to meet face to face. I think, given this staffing situation within scrutiny support, it would certainly be easier, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, that it would be easier to do it on a digital basis, Lauren, from a staffing point of view, as long as we don't have people who are very disappointed by doing that.
I think, Chair, if I can just come in, yeah, there's just a bit of temporary cover within ourselves and democratic support. Other boards have agreed that they'll stay virtual for the time being, but if there is any call-in or petition or a reason that it would be particularly useful to meet face-to-face, that we can schedule that one in. It's entirely up to yourselves whether or not you want to agree that for the foreseeable or on a meeting-by-meeting basis, but it'd just be helpful in terms of forward planning for democratic. If we can do the next meeting tonight, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Evans, would you mind if I came in on this, please?
Please do.
We did have a discussion about this at the council's extended leadership team last week, and said, in terms of us declaring a climate emergency, we've really got to take this seriously. And actually, if we all travel in, some people, significant distances to scrutinies on every single meeting, clearly we're not going to be reducing our carbon footprint. And I think Lauren's got it spot on. There will be times when you really do want to come face to face, particularly, you know, if there are things that you think you're going to get that, decent conversation that you may need together. But by and large, I think we're agreeing that scrutinies will be managed like this, just to A, make the best use of time, and B, to reduce, as I said, the carbon emissions and the footprint, and really tackle the climate emergency that we've got.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm comfortable with that, but please shout out anybody who has worries about that situation. I don't think I see anybody wishing to. So let us say, I think for the foreseeable future, we'll carry on in this format unless and until we feel there's a need for a meeting. And that it may be that if we do set up a working group or working party, we may wish to have face-to-face on that, but let's play it by ear, shall we, on that? So is everybody comfortable with that approach for now, as far as the scrutiny board is concerned? Good, thank you very much. So thank you all for your input this evening. Thank you for Julie and her team have put a lot of work and effort into this one. I saw you managed to do quite a decent bit of delegation here, Julie. I was very impressed with that. So
when you've got a good team, Councillor Evans, yeah, you can let them shine, and they certainly have tonight. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to watch.